Dear Fox and the San Antonio Spurs have reached a new 4-year, $229 million extension agreement, but the responses have been largely negative. I express that with an element of astonishment because when the Spurs acquired Fox, everyone praised the trade. The idea of acquiring a young, highly skilled all-star caliber guard to complement Victor Wembanyama appeared to be an obvious choice. Once they executed the trade, this type of contract was inevitably the next sensible progression. Clearly, the distinction between the trade and the contract lies in the expense. Fox effectively leveraged his 2026 free agency to compel the Kings to send him to his desired location, the Spurs, which diminished the return value Sacramento could anticipate. This represented a significant moment in the NBA, as the Spurs have been an outstanding franchise for approximately 25 years and have experienced success in trades and free agency previously. However, I wouldn't label them as a destination team, especially not compared to some of the larger market teams in the league, particularly without Greg Popovich as head coach. However, Fox still considered the Spurs his top option for one clear reason: aligning himself with Victor Wembanyama. This marked the initial occurrence of this in Wemby's early career. We had listened to rumors that other competitors admired him and recognized his tremendous potential to possibly become the top basketball player globally in just a few years. However, Fox naming the Spurs as his top trade preference was the initial instance where someone truly took action on it. Several contracts and 3 first-round selections, including one from Charlotte, which was improbable to convey and ultimately did not. The Spurs possess the 2027 first-round pick and the Timberwolves' 2031 first-round pick, which they acquired by trading down in the 2024 draft with Minnesota to move up and choose Rob Dillingham. An astonishingly low cost for a player of Fox's quality and age. However, as I pointed out, there was a purpose for that. Fox not only made the Spurs his preferred team, but his 2026 unrestricted free agency is now clearly gone due to his new extension in San Antonio. This truly serves as an excellent illustration of how expenses can influence perceptions of a player. Fox remains just as impressive now as he was when the Spurs acquired him, a transaction that nearly everyone praised. Although the trade was a good deal, the contract may not be. However, the contract is certainly not the only aspect that has altered in this situation. When the Spurs acquired Fox, they were in desperate need of assistance at guard. Steph Castle showed promise as a rookie, yet he may not be expected to reach All-Star or All-NBA caliber in terms of creating. The alternative guard choices were also not particularly strong, which further justified the Fox trade. In the draft lottery, the Spurs landed in the ideal position for guard assistance, second overall, where they selected Dylan Harper. Harper's a quick and powerful score-first left-handed guard from Rutgers who has already made a significant impact in San Antonio. Now, don't misunderstand me, that isn't inherently a negative aspect. A group consisting of Fox, Castle, and Harper is extremely skilled. Just because Harper was the second pick and Castle performed well as a rookie doesn't necessarily indicate that they shouldn't pay Fox. However, it definitely creates a somewhat uncomfortable dynamic among the three of them, particularly with this new addition implemented. Fox primarily focuses on scoring and isn't an elite floor spacer, similar to what we can anticipate from Harper's potential in the NBA. Casso, on the other hand, serves as a two-way complementary player but also lacks elite floor spacing ability. To be clear, it's far too early to simply assume that these individuals don't fit together. However, it is somewhat worrisome that the Spurs have signed Fox to such a substantial contract, which also prompts the question of whether they would have proceeded with the Fox trade had they been aware they would select Harper second overall. On one hand, that's somewhat absurd, since the Spurs had an excellent trade arranged and then a few months later experienced fantastic lottery luck, in a lottery where many of the weakest teams had poor lottery luck overall. Nonetheless, I believe it's reasonable to question whether the Spurs might feel some regret over acquiring Fox. If you were going to support that argument, all you need to do is reference Fox's statistics after the trade deadline with the Spurs. Contrasting his statistics in the early part of the year with the Kings to his performance in San Antonio is definitely worrying, and that was even without someone like Harper making the rotation of guards even stranger. The three-point shooting is the most troubling aspect, since Fox relies heavily on being a threat from that range, like almost any guard of his level in the league. When De'Aaron Fox is sinking threes, he becomes virtually unguardable. However, when he isn't, he simply isn't as impactful, which might be particularly relevant for a Spurs team that already has some issues with spacing. Nonetheless, there are a few aspects to highlight in that limited 17-game sample in San Antonio for Fox. Firstly, he was coping with a hand injury right from the moment he arrived, and it was evidently troubling him. He kept tampering with it during matches, and it affected his shooting hand. It was serious enough that he underwent surgery in the offseason to fix it. Additionally, Fox participated in only 5 games with Victor Wembanyama before being sidelined for the remainder of the season due to health concerns, resulting in an exceedingly depleted roster around Fox as the Spurs aimed for a lower season finish. I truly believe that you can't gain much insight from the 17 games Fox participated in with the Spurs, considering all the reasons I just outlined. That won't be anywhere near the circumstances he will face when the season begins in October. I doubt the Spurs have any regrets about the trade after only 17 games. It was an excellent value deal for them at a needed position, and they had already chosen to sign him to a match contract when they originally made the trade. I genuinely doubt they would reverse the trade, even if they realized they would acquire Harper a few months later. However, even beyond the details of his circumstances in San Antonio, many individuals argue that this is simply a poor contract for a player of Fox's level. If you're presenting that argument, the main point of your case would be the Spurs just committed more than $55 million annually for a player in Fox who isn't even among the NBA's top 10 point guards. For me, that's somewhat of an exaggeration. While it's true I've generally held a more optimistic view on Fox compared to others, the reasoning still remains valid. If you aim to maximize efficiency while constructing an NBA team, which is increasingly crucial, Fox is precisely the type of player who should not receive a max contract. He has virtually no playoff achievements, raises concerns about his compatibility with your team, is challenging to pair well with given his lack of floor spacing, and isn't a top 5 player at his position or among the top 15 in the league overall. Additionally, the Spurs were not obligated to take this action. They didn't need to acquire Fox simply because he expressed a desire to go there. The Spurs might have opted for patience in developing around Wemby instead of sacrificing assets for a max deal with Fox. For better or worse, they have linked the upcoming years of the Wemby era to a player who has participated in 7 playoff games throughout his career at 27 years of age. The starting expense of the trade may not have been excessively high, but one could contend that the opportunity cost of selecting Fox as the primary significant move of the Wemby era just wasn't justified. I understand that viewpoint, but I have some concerns regarding it. This contract, in my view, does not instantly render Aaron Fox untradeable at the value level that the Spurs have just acquired him for. If the next couple of seasons don't unfold ideally and Harper and Castle become the future backcourt, I'm sure the Spurs can recoup much of the value they traded for Fox, even with the new contract he just signed. As I stated, I've typically rated higher than Fox on many occasions, and I really like the concept of the Spurs having an abundance of high-potential guards who can develop collectively, along with the ability to trade any of them at any moment for an improvement. And third, and most crucially, this argument removes nearly all context from team development. Overall, is this maximum contract somewhat excessive considering Fox's rank in the league and relative to his counterparts in that position? Indeed, likely. However, the Spurs had already decided to compensate him when they acquired him through the trade, and to me, it's not an excessive overpayment. Regarding the opportunity cost, indeed, that is accurate. The Spurs might have held off for another year or two before taking such action. However, that presumes many factors. It's presuming Fox won't mesh well with the Spurs. It presumes that a string of prime stars will be eager to join San Antonio in the coming years. Additionally, it expects WBB to be healthy a few years down the line, which is likely the main distinction between my view and others regarding the Spurs. I wish for WBB to remain healthy for 20 years and to be amazing throughout that period. However, I am worried about his long-term durability. His build, his stature, and the league's history indicate that players like him tend to have shorter careers and prime seasons than we hope for. If I were the Spurs, I would aim to speed up my timeline with him to align with a player whose peak could begin in a year and last 5 or 6 years, instead of assuming he will enter his prime at 25 and perform at that level until 35, and trading for Fox aligns with my vision of that timeline. Many assumptions can be made about the scenario in San Antonio, and you can engage in speculation if you wish, but the Spurs had a prime player at a needed position requesting to join their team, and they had an opportunity to acquire him for less than his actual worth. Even if it means sacrificing the MX contract, that's still an obvious choice for me, particularly since one of the worst outcomes regarding Fox is that Harper performs so well that I'd have to trade Fox, which I'm perfectly okay with. Oh no, I possess 2 excellent guards and now I must exchange the older and pricier one. What should I do? That isn't really an issue. The sole downside for me would be if having Fox present hinders Harper's growth. However, I am skeptical that this would be true, and even if it were, I have faith that the Spurs will sort it out. Honestly, if you're not a fan of the contracts, I can understand why. I simply don't view it as the type of disaster that certain individuals were attempting to portray it as.